Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. This episode of Life's Best Medicine is brought to you by the good people of Keto Mojo and Health Code. Gosh, this is on a personal level. One of my patients I just saw today came in, and her husband recently passed away from a terminal illness, ongoing illness. And, we started talking, and she said, one thing, Health Code, he was able to get that down. And that was the one thing in life he looked forward to. He would get his chocolate macadamia nut and he would mix it with some peanut butter, or she would throw in some extra avocado just to make sure he was getting his nutrition. And he stuck around longer than anticipated, but it's really nice that a company like Health Code could really contribute to his well-being and in his last days, give him something that he enjoys. So I appreciate them for what they're doing and for providing good nutrition, and for people who need it, with avocado oil and coconut oil and whey protein. They're doing such a good job. So it's nice to see that my seniors or people who are really busy can just blend something up. That's my go-to a lot of times if I'm too busy at lunchtime to take much of a break and I'm hungry. That's what I'll do. So Health Code, thank you for sponsoring this episode. And also Keto Mojo, I'm using your product all the time with my patients. I've used it since I started this practice, and you've done such a great job of bringing the community together, giving me another tool to help with patients, seeing if they're on track. The ketones really tell us it's like a lie detector test, and also is a lie detector test for the continuous glucose monitor, because a finger stick is more accurate. So I can see, exactly if their sugars are running low or high. And so Keto Mojo has been my go-to tool. So I'm very appreciative of them reaching out and sponsoring this podcast. So enjoy this episode. And again, there's a discount code that I have with Health Code, and that's MetHealth, METHEALTH, all capital. And also Keto Mojo, I do have a discount link on my website. If you're interested, I'll have that in the show notes also. But thank you for sponsoring this episode, and sit back and enjoy. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. These are the kind of episodes that keep me up at night because I get excited and I can't stand it anymore. And it's funny because, being in the low carb community and, just being a doctor, salt has had such a weird history. Like going back, they said, don't you ever have salt? It's going to make you have heart attacks and it's going to make your blood pressure high and all that kind of stuff. So I was in Utah at Salt Lake, Keto Salt Lake, and they go, hey, we could go down to this Redmond salt mining for the day. I'm like, we're going to go to a salt mine all day? And what are we going to do? Like look at salt? And so, it's funny because I was not anticipating that would be so much fun. So I have Darryl Bosshardt, who is the guy there that we get to talk to and ask him all the questions about salt and the history and the salt mine. But I'll tell you, Darryl, it was so awesome being there and seeing these guys were so passionate about what they do. Everyone at the mine was like, oh my gosh, let me tell you about this. And they were just excited. It wasn't like, okay, I got to get this tour. Here's the thing. Over here on the left is where we make the, it was like, you could tell the passion and people love the mine. So it's so good to have you and welcome. And so tell people your story and growing up, and you grew up in the mine, huh?
Yeah, Dr. Lenskis, it's so great to be on your program today. I'm just super excited. People think that salt is a commodity, that salt's boring. As you say here, maybe because we're a little crazy, but we think salt is everything. Salt is life. And What's interesting is the medical doctor, in order of importance, we have oxygen, and then we have water, and then we have salt. And without those three things, the body will automatically start to shut down. As you pointed out, people have heard that salt's bad for them, that you should eat less salt. Yet when you go to the hospital, the first thing you're going to get is an IV of saline solution, which is salt water. And so, salt is not this terrible thing that we have heard that it was over the years. Similar to fat, we heard that all fat was bad, and then come to realize that the right fat is actually essential for our eyes and for our brain and for our organs. And so salt has that same misconception that hopefully we can talk a little bit more about today.
Yeah, I think it's huge. Yeah, I mean, even looking back, biblical times, they say they're the salt of the earth, right? And how important salt is. And so, and even they say if you lose your saltiness, like you're ineffective now. And I think from a low carb keto perspective, when I see people struggling, it's because they're not eating enough salt. They start getting muscle cramps and their mood gets messed up and all those things. And some people, I have some patients, they just put some salt on the back of their hand and lick it off, and they're like, okay, my cravings went away, I feel good. And we could talk a little of the physiology that's really, really intriguing. But yeah, I would love to hear your take on that, just going back.
Well, when you think about it, our tears are salt, our sweat is salt, our urine is salt. And so our bodies are saline solution in motion. And we can drink distilled water, we can drink tap water, we could drink coffee, but we are still going to sweat and cry and urinate salt, because salt's job in the body is so critical. The major thing, as you know, salt's job is to help regulate the intercellular and extracellular fluids and a whole slew of other things. It cleanses the body. It keeps our hand moves because of an electric current, and our bodies have to conduct electricity. Outside of a spiritual discussion, if we're both alive and talking 1 minute and then we're dead on the ground the next minute, outside of a spiritual discussion, the only difference in those two is the absence of an electric current. And so our bodies have to conduct electricity. Distilled water is a very poor conductor of electricity. And that's why this electrolyte is so essential for our bodies. And yet sometimes we forget that. And so, since the dawn of time, every civilization has started around access to the salt deposits because it was essential for human health and animal health. The term salary was because Roman soldiers were paid a salary or paid in salt. The term or the phrase, is a man worth his salt, that some people have heard, is because you were getting paid in salt. And if you weren't earning, or, if you weren't working hard enough to earn your keep, you weren't worth your salt. It was written about in every religious book. It was a source of trade. It was a gift for weddings. And I mean, it is such an important part. And yet, it goes from that to this terrible, thing that we need to avoid at all cost. And so it's fun having somebody like yourself, who's a medical doctor, who knows the importance of the balanced electrolytes in the body. And when those electrolytes go off, all kinds of things start to go wrong. From hyponatremia, we have, every year we hear of military guys down in California or in Texas, and they're drinking lots of water and they're running, and yet they fall over and sometimes even die because of flushing all of those electrolytes. And because of that, sports teams picked up on this. The Florida Gators realized that if they were out there running and just drinking water, and they were drinking lots of it, they would get muscle cramps, the body would start to shut down, headaches, fatigue. And so they created a product to aid the Florida Gators. They called it Gator Aid, and took some electrolytes, some water, some food coloring, some sugars. But yet it's not all that other stuff. It's just the pure salt that our bodies need and crave. And so I'm just delighted to be able to talk more about that today.
Yeah, and that's what's fun, because I think when we look back in time, we're going to say, oh, it was the other white salt, the white powder that was the problem, was the sugar. Because what we see in the low carb community, and you're going to hear people say, oh, they're eating a terrible diet with chips and crackers, all that stuff. Then they go on a low carb diet and they'll lose 5, 6, 8 pounds that first week. But it's not fat weight they're losing. What's happening is when they're cutting down the sugar, their insulin drops, because When sugar goes up, insulin goes up to get rid of that sugar. So what also happens is people who have chronic, like morbid obesity, diabetes, they'll have they're shooting insulin. Their insulin's really high. Insulin acts on the kidneys to hold on to salt, right? So if I say, okay, let me lower down your insulin a bit, then you pee out extra salt. So that's the weight you lose initially. It's water. We call it water weight, but it's really the water follows the salt. So people have to understand that. So that's
And the
it, yeah.
and water follows glycogen too, right? So when we have all these glycogen storages in our body, 2 to 3 grams of water attached to that glycogen. And so as that glycogen drops, that water follows it out as well. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So both of those things are happening at once. And the big thing, and what's interesting with salt, and the reason where people are, when they're fasting, it helps for me in particular. I know it helps because when your insulin is really low and you're losing salt, your body says, oh, I need more salt. So what it's saying is people start getting sweet cravings a lot of times, like they want chocolate or candy, because what that does is raises the insulin up and that makes you hold on to more salt. But if you just take salt, you don't have to do that anymore because you deplete your salt
Oh.
stores. So it's amazing how the body works. And that's why, we crave certain things and it may not be directly why. And there's also studies with Dr. Unwin who was looking at this from a medical perspective. And he found that with people on low carb and ketogenic diet, when you lower that insulin to a certain threshold, you could eat salt all day long and you're not going to raise your blood pressure. It's not an issue. It keeps it at a good level. It doesn't go to a high level anymore. So that's why when people have high blood pressure, 90% of the time, based on their studies, we can fix that problem just by lowering that darn insulin down. So taking in more salt gives you an advantage to be able to lower that insulin also.
I've never understood the mechanics of why that is. Animals are really smart and they listen to their cravings, and we as humans, I think over the last many years have kind of lost our ability, at least when it comes to sugar and salt, to really understand that craving. And oftentimes I think people think they're craving a bag of potato chips, or they're craving sugar or a donut, but what they're really craving is the salt. And I didn't understand that relationship with the insulin and the salt cravings, because it just makes perfect sense. And so what I suggest quite often is on those first cravings where you think, oh man, I just need some sugar. Maybe you're new to fasting, or you're trying it, or you're 3/4 the way through the day and you got to get that last little bit. By just taking a little crystal of salt and putting it under your tongue, it actually, if it's clean, natural salt, it has a very sweet, almost sugar type flavor, because I think our bodies are craving it. And by the time you eat the 4th or 5th piece, it starts to taste a lot more salty and less sweet, because I think the body's picking up on that. Hey, our salt levels are coming up, and we don't, crave it like we did on that first, very delicious piece of salt.
Yeah, and also, a lot of the runners will use it. They're drinking pickle juice and things that have a lot of salt in it, right? Because that helps them to keep going more. And also with fasting, it really is a benefit. Like for me, I don't even consider a fasting day. Here's what I'm using: your Relight, this one, the strawberry, man, it's dang good. But yeah, that's what I use. I go, man, and if I'm sitting there talking to someone, I have a sip of that. It's like I just ate something sweet and I feel good. And I get the salt and magnesium, potassium. As a matter of fact, it's funny, just talking about other stuff. Right before I came on with you, I got an email from a patient. Last night I talked to her and she said, I'm having palpitations. I'm getting weird heart stuff. And I feel like, I'm really concerned about it. And she's on a ton of supplements and everything. She's very, very fit and healthy. And I said, you know what? Let's just for the heck of it tonight, try some magnesium powder, not the pills, but the powder. So she went to the store last night, got it, and I get an email this morning. She's like, "Oh my gosh, it's a miracle! My palpitations are gone, my heart rate's normal, everything's great. I feel calm, everything." So a lot of people have a magnesium deficiency also, and so once we replace, and one of my good friends is a triathlete, and he started getting palpitations, and same thing. I said, while you're waiting to see the cardiologist, let's give you some magnesium, and he did it. And he was annoyed by it because he's an ER doc, and he took it, and he has not had palpitations since then. He was magnesium deficient. So constipation, mood stuff, stress, not sleeping. So people just don't realize the importance of these minerals. And another one I'll just throw at you real quick, because I had a patient, she was actually drinking distilled water, super healthy, health freak, like really, like, never drank out of a bottle, those kind of things. Anyway, she was getting cramps all the time. So we were trying all the different things, magnesium, potassium, sodium, nothing was helping. And so finally she said, yeah, my cramps went away. I said, what did you do? She said, I went to my chiropractor and he said, stop drinking distilled water, drink tap water for a few days. She started just drinking tap water. It was some trace element she was missing. We don't even know what it was, but her problem resolved with just that. And I know in the salt mine, you have a ton of trace elements and all this stuff with the salt that comes with it.
What's interesting is if we went back before the invention of the refrigerator, all of us would have eaten more salt, because if we ate anything out of season, we would have had to preserve it. And we would have done that with salt, whether it's, meats, jerkies, kimchi, sauerkraut, vegetables that we're fermenting. Salt would have been a big part of that. And yet now that we have the refrigerator and we have all of these artificial preservatives that keep food way longer than they should, now we think that salt's is the problem. But in all of humanity, animals don't overdose on salt. And as long as you have good, clean water, it'd be very hard for you and I to overdose on good, clean salt, because our kidneys, outside of, somebody that's on dialysis or kidney failure, our kidneys have an amazing ability to process salt. And it's only when we have the processed salt that's in overabundance on food that should not be, preserved so heavily, that we shouldn't be eating anyway. And so we think it's the salt, but it's actually the nutrient poor food and the high processed chemicals and salts that are going into the food that's the problem. Where, if you go back into history, salt wasn't the problem, just like good, clean fat isn't the problem. There are fats that are a problem, but the good, clean, natural fats aren't.
Exactly. And it's what neighborhood it's in. Like, what are you eating with it? If you're eating French fries all the time, it's going to be an issue. You get a lot of salt, but it's combined with a lot of bad stuff. And, it's interesting. I wanted to ask you, well, one thing just before it was on my mind is I was thinking when we were talking about it, is I remember visiting friends out in the middle of nowhere, and they'll have a salt lick out there for the cows, or they'll have it for like the deer to come in. Like, why is that attracts, like, in nature they're not getting enough salt? Why is it now that all of a sudden we're using salt licks for animals?
Well, it's a great question, but salt has always been used for animals. If you go back to, the Romans, the Persians, they would all create their civilizations around access to salt, because the animals and humans need it. It's such an essential part of life, because our bodies are saline solution in motion. So the way that this deposit in Redmond, Utah was found was when the early settlers came into the valley. They actually saw the deer and the local animals eating the soil that was right there with the salt. And when this was back in the 1950s, when my grandfather started mining the salt, but when they started mining the salt, they had found that the Native Americans had actually harvested the salt long before the settlers had come through the area. By then, the Native Americans were long gone, but their ruins were there in the salt deposit. And then when they went down to Mesa Verde, the big state park there, and they were excavating those ruins at the Mesa Verde State Park, they actually found chunks of the Redmond salt that the Native Americans had harvested and traded and taken all the way down to Mesa Verde, hundreds of miles away, because it was so essential for them to have good, clean salt for them as well. So salt has a fascinating history, and animals and humans have always needed it. And farmers know that if they don't feed salt or put salt out for the animals, the calf rates drop, the birth defects go up, a whole slew of problems will arise with a farmer whose animals don't have access to good, clean salt.
Yeah, and also, I was while you're saying that, I mean, so much stuff it just popping in my head, the questions about salt. But recently I started doing more fermenting, and if you're making kimchi or if you're making sauerkraut, you have to like all you're doing is chopping up cabbage, put some water in there, and you put salt in there, right? So what is it I don't put the salt? What's the salt doing? Is that keeping it from antimicrobials, or what is that? What's the purpose of they figured out? And then the other amazing thing is when you pour the salt on the cabbage. As a matter of fact, you don't even add water. I'm thinking I have to add water to soak this thing, but it pulls all the water right out of the cabbage, and that's how you're making the sauerkraut.
Yeah, so one of the unique things about salt is hygroscopic. So if we put a salt crystal out on the table in a really moist, humid environment, it'll suck the water out of the air. And so when you put salt on a steak, you'll actually see, blood and pools of moisture that are pulled up out of the steak, or if you put salt on a tomato, you'll see little pools of salt that pool, the water pools around those salt crystals, which is one of the challenges with a lot of salts today. So if we went back years ago, salt was always harvested in its whole complete form. If we went out to the ocean water is about 3% salt. Our bodies are about 0.9. And so the reason that when we swim in the ocean that it stings our eyes is because the ocean is 2 to 3 times saltier than the saline in our bodies, which is, a standard saline solution is 0.9%. And that's why the ocean stings, where if you get a saline, you can wrench your eyes and there's no sensation, or an IV of 0.9, it doesn't burn your arm if it's sodium chloride 0.9% saline, where a potassium chloride IV or something like that will actually burn because it's so foreign to the body. And so if you went to the ocean and it has, potassium chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, selenium, zinc, copper, phosphorus, iodine, the reason that seaweed is a great source of iodine is because it's in the ocean, which has iodine, and seafood has sources of iodine. So humans would take seawater and they would pull the water out of the ocean, let it evaporate completely, and you've got all of those trace elements, and then you have the sodium and chloride. And then you've got salt. Well, years ago, because salt is hygroscopic, if I have a shaker of salt, that water is going to suck out of the air into the shaker, make the salt sticky so it doesn't flow. So one of the things that salt companies do to process the salt is they can take the seawater, they can move it through a series of evaporation ponds where they can pull out the potassium chloride, move it to the next pond, pull out the magnesium chloride, move it to the next pond, pull out the calcium chloride, and then they can sell that leftover product as salt. But it's sticky because it absorbs moisture. So what salt companies do is they say, they looked at all these chemicals and said, what chemicals could we coat that crystal with to stop that crystal's ability to interact with moisture? And as we talked earlier, salt's job is to help regulate moisture, one of its many, many jobs in the body. And so salt companies today, a lot of salt companies will take that salt crystal and they will coat it with a chemical. So when it's raining outside and it's humid, the salt will still pour out of the shaker. So the old tagline, when it rains, it pours, and it's got the cute little girl with the umbrella and the salt's pouring out of her shaker. That's because they've added chemicals to the salt to stop the salt's ability to interact with moisture in the air. And so when you take this product that's been part of life since the dawn of man, our bodies are saline solution in motion, very similar to the primordial oceans, and then you coat that salt that's supposed to give us life with a chemical to stop its ability to interact with moisture, and then you put that on food that we should never eat in the first place, and then you wonder why you get sick. And it's not the salt and it's not the fat, but when you take processed salt that you probably shouldn't eat and you put it on processed food and fats that you shouldn't eat and you put them together, it's a terrible combination.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never thought about that way. And I also see that they always say that we were adding iodine. They add iodine back to the salt, right? So that you get iodine. Is that necessary? Why do they do that?
I love the iodine question because no discussion on salt would be complete without the discussion on iodine. Now, I'm sure, most of your clients that come in, they're probably iodine deficient. Many people today, because of our diets and lifestyles, we don't get enough iodine. Well, the reason that salt is associated with iodine is World War I. So if we go back to World War I, the US institutes the draft. And when they institute the draft, they find out that a lot of men coming out of the Midwest have a big goiter problem, a big swelling of the thyroid. And you can't draft somebody into the military if they have a big goiter problem. And so the scientists sat down with the government and said, what can we do to solve this problem? We know that goiter, sorry, my frog in my throat today. We know that goiter is a result of an iodine deficiency. And so what can we do to encourage or to force the US population to eat more iodine? And so they looked at adding iodine as a supplement to bread or to flour as a dough enhancer. They looked at adding it maybe to a water supply, like you do in some cities that have the fluoride added. It wasn't stable. And so they said, what can we add? What does everybody have to eat that we could add iodine to that would be shelf stable enough that it would be lasting? And the answer was salt. And so from World War I forward, the US government said if a salt company does not add iodine to their salt, even if there's trace amounts of iodine in the salt company must put a statement on their label that says this salt does not supply iodide, a necessary nutrient. And so from then on, every salt company that doesn't add iodine has to put that statement on there. Interestingly enough, natural salt has trace amounts of iodine in it. Not enough to meet your daily recommended allowance, but there's some there. And so since then, they have done studies on the iodine added to salt. And what they've found is it's less than 10% bioavailable. So eating high amounts of iodized salt does provide a source of iodine, but it's not a very bioavailable source, much less than if you were to take a great iodine supplement or to eat foods like good dulse or other kelp, seafood that's actually naturally rich in iodine versus the processed salt iodine that's in many salts today.
So you have more access bioequivalent. So there's a lot of things like that I learned doing this podcast and just talking to people. For instance, kombucha, right? They have to put the amount of sugar they put in it before the fermentation process. So unfortunately, most of the stuff on the market, like if you make your own, is totally different. Like if I make yogurt, you put some kind of sugar in it. Basically, inulin is what we use, or potato starch. But the little bacteria ferment on that. That's how they live. So if you don't do it without that, it's just not going to work. So you just have to do it the right way, and then you understand that what you're absorbing. So I have to ask you one more question that's on my mind now. So say I'm riding my bike and I'm near the beach, right? What's the difference if I go out and I scoop up a thing of ocean water and start trying to drink that versus having my water and adding the relight to it, the Redmond salt? What's the difference?
Great question. And people have heard that you can't drink seawater and it makes you sick. And it will if you don't dilute it, because the ocean water is, again, 3%, 2 to 3%, depending on the body of water and a lot of different factors. But our bodies need 0.9 or about 1%. So if you and I were out in the ocean and we were marooned, or we're sitting on a rubber raft in the middle of the ocean, and we have distilled water, and we could drink that, and we've got an endless supply, or we can drink the ocean water and it's an endless supply. Either one of those options are going to kill us, because if we drink just distilled water, we're going to flush every bit of potassium, magnesium, calcium. We need those, and we're going to die. If we say we're not going to do that, we're going to just drink ocean water, we're going to start vomiting and we're going to die as well. What we would have to do is, if we took that ocean water, mixed it with distilled water, and came up with a solution about 0.9, essentially we've got an endless supply of saline solution, which is going to keep us alive, at least way longer than it would be if we were to drink either pure distilled water or just drink ocean water. And so when you're out for a run, you could stop and drink some ocean water. It's going to taste extremely salty. And a little bit would be fine, as long as you could offset that with some other good, clean water, because our bodies need that ratio. We can overdose on salt, we can overdose on water, but if we're in the hospital, I could be hooked up to an IV, whether it's a lactated Ringer's or maybe just a standard saline, and I'm going to be fine. You could pump gallons of saline, as long as I've got a catheter. I'm going to be fine. But if you get that out of balance, then everything starts to go downhill pretty quickly.
Well, it's funny when you say that. I was laughing because when you were talking about the IV, that's exactly what we do. We give people saltwater IVs, right? And so the crazy part is, I would get called by the trauma surgeons, for instance. They call me in the middle of the night and they'll go, "Okay, we can't get this person's sugars under control. They're diabetic, and they came in with a car accident." And so they'll call me at 2 a.m. I'm like, "Guys, what are you giving them in their IV?" Like D5 half normal, which is sugar. We're giving sugar water in their veins. I'm like, "So you're giving them sugar water and their sugars are high. How about if we just give them the normal saline and cut out the sugar and see what happens?" Call me if it's not normal when you do that. And then I never hear from them again, because just taking why are you giving sugar to someone who has sugar of 400? It doesn't make any sense at all. But people just don't think. They go, "Well, they need nutrition." Well, you know what? If their sugar's 400, they don't need extra sugar. They do need the salt though. So how about we just make that little tweak and you do that and their sugar's normalized? Yeah,
Yeah,
just amazing.
the body is so fascinating and has such an ability to recover. And we were talking, I think, before the show started about, different diets and trends that kind of come and go. The thing that I think's neat, years ago, the health food movement back in the 70s started to get some real legs, and that's when people started to be a little more aware about reading labels and what they're eating. Then we went through this organic phase where as long as it was organic, it was fine. You could eat organic cookies and organic ice cream and organic garbage, and then people wondered why they weren't feeling good. And
Yeah,
just because
and also you could do the Entenmann's cakes. I might be older, but Entenmann's, they go, oh, it's low fat. They had the Keebler elves and all those guys. So you're like, oh, it's low fat. I could eat these all day, and you don't realize that like that's spiking your insulin and sugars, and you're not going to lose weight doing that.
So I think it's great that now we've got medical doctors like yourself who know the power of low carb and know how to use that as a tool. It's not the only tool in your toolbox, but it's a great tool for many people that that's it's so different from the low fat, high carb, low fat, low protein diets that for a period of time everybody thought was the new magic bullet.
Yeah, and I think people are getting more wise. Obviously the sponsor of this show is Health Code, and he uses Redmond salt in there. I've confirmed that and looked at. I was like, oh, you use Redmond. Yeah, I mean it makes sense. But also it makes sense. I think obviously you guys, you're close by, so you won't have to ship so much, or people are worried about the environment and stuff. Because I was thinking about, I have so many people tell me, oh, I just eat Himalayan salt. Like I'm like, the Himalayan salt. I wonder how much effort it takes to get that to you, right? That's you think about the impact, like all the machines and all that to get the salt and then to ship it across whatever continents and stuff. What about that? So when people go, oh, I'm not using Redmonds, I use Himalayan or I use this other salt. What do you say to those people?
Well, I say there's three good questions that somebody should ask. And obviously I'm a little biased. And if you end up using real salt, the Redmond Real Salt, hey, it's great. I appreciate it. We have a fun company here in Utah. A lot of great people are involved in the company. But I think these three great questions, if you ask those, you might end up with Redmond, you might end up with another product. But I think those are three good questions. So the first one is who's producing it? Today, many of our products, it's really hard to know exactly who is producing that product. You might get it at a big box store. It's changed hands dozens of times. But if you can kind of know your food and know actually who's producing the supplement, who's producing the salt, who's producing the steak, then you can ask the second question, which is what's the source? When it comes to salt, knowing the source is really important. It can come from a current ocean, like the Great Salt, or like the current ocean, like the San Francisco Bay or the Gulf of Mexico, the Sea of Japan. And we humans have not been the best stewards of this planet we call Earth. And unfortunately, an Exxon Valdez spill up in Alaska eventually is going to come down all the way past South America. And so if you know the source, you'll know where that salt's coming from. Which I think is really important. It could be from the Himalayan deposit in Pakistan, the Bolivian pink salt down in the Andes, or it could be from a Utah deposit. And then the third question is, what's the process? What are they doing to it? Are they taking anything out? Are they putting anything in? And I think if you ask yourself those three questions on any food you're eating, who's producing it? What's the source, or where's it coming from, and what's the process, you're going to end up with a great product. And I believe if you're in Bolivia, there's no reason for me to send salt from Utah down to Bolivia if they have a good, clean source of natural salt there, which they do. It's a beautiful Andean pink salt. And if you live in Nepal or in Pakistan and you've got this great access to salt that they're harvesting right, that they're using the right processes, great, use that salt there.
So really, just because it says Himalayan, it could be anyone manufacturing. Someone could be doing it, manufacturing it terribly, or someone could be doing a really good job with that.
Oh, for sure. And there's hundreds or at least dozens of mines in Pakistan that produce the salt and just ship it all to the coast, and often it's commingled. And then it comes over in big shipping containers, and then Costco might buy a bag, and Kroger might buy a bag. And so knowing what deposit or mine that that this shaker came from becomes pretty hard in many salt operations. There are salt operations that you can figure that out. If you buy a nice gray salt from France, you can find out which part of Brittany, France it was produced in, what processes they're using, what quality control they're using. But with salt particularly, it can be challenging. One of the beautiful things today is farmers markets, where you can go down and talk to the guy that you're getting your eggs from, and talk to the guy that you're getting your steak from. Now, unfortunately, in some farmers markets, at least around here, you show up and they're just buying bulk food, and they don't know where it's coming from, but they're selling it at the farmers market too. So you do have to ask a few questions. But I think as consumers, if we're a little more engaged in our purchases, whether that's food or even a mountain bike, I think we vote for the community or the world we want to live in with the money we spend. And I think with food, why not be a little more engaged and inquisitive when it comes to the food choices that we make?
Yeah, and it's funny, even before, like 2 weeks ago, we were out of Redmonds at my house, and I would order it like 6 or 7 at a time, so you just keep it. And then my wife's like, "Oh my gosh, we're out. Wait, call them. We had to." And it was like a panic situation. I'm like, "Wait, relax." And she's like, "I'm not going to the store and buying the other salt. I mean, I love cooking with this." And so it was a funny thing because she's not particular on stuff. She's not really particular. But if you think about all the foods we eat, like all these supplements, and we don't know where they're getting the salt from, and it could be this terrible, like highly processed salt. And we're saying we're trying to stay away from processed foods. And for me, I'll tell you, going to the mine, first of all, everyone was so cool and nice. You have your little store there and all that stuff, and everyone's like friendly and really, really a cool place. And then they get the passion of the people working there. And then we got to go and shoot guns at dynamite, that was the first time doing that. That was a blast. And then you guys shoot a fire cannon at the ship that's up on the side of the hill, like all those fun things you get to do. But then going down in the mine, the surprising thing to me was, just the amount of science and technology and all this stuff you have to do. And I know, and you can explain the process, but he was explaining that our guide, I think it was Kyle, right? Is that right? Yeah. So it was saying, look, there's certain places where when we're getting the salt for you, it's going to be, we don't take them certain machines in there because of you get exhaust fumes you don't think about. And these, like, you use the big machines for the animal stuff and what you're using for for salting the road, things like that. And maybe you have a different process for the human consumption part of it. So maybe you can explain that to people a little bit.
Yeah, so this deposit, geologists say, is an ancient seabed. So geologists tell us that 150 million years ago, of course, I wasn't alive back then to confirm the actual date, but the Arctic Ocean flooded down and left this massive body of salt water. It was called the Sundance Sea, covered Utah, Colorado, massive inland sea. Then it gets buried under volcanic activity and sediment, and then Utah gets compressed and pushed together. You look at all the mountain ranges in Utah, they all run north and south. And this deposit that was laid down layer by layer gets pushed up into a dome or into a pillar. So the deposit's about a quarter mile wide, 3 miles long, and about 5,000 feet deep. It turns and goes horizontal again. And so this deposit just serendipitously was pushed up under my grandfather's farm. And so back in the 1950s, he and his brother were farming this piece of property. Back in World War II.
So he already owned the land before he realized the salt was there? He didn't buy it because of the salt necessarily.
Correct. Yep.
Wow.
That's right.
That is crazy.
My great-great-grandfather had a farm right here in this little area. He kind of immigrated from Europe, came over, kind of homestead, type, kind of American dream, back in the early settlers, coming through the West. And they had this farm, and north and south of their farm was a little outcropping of salt that the Native Americans and the animals would eat at. In World War II, my grandfather ended up in California as a riveter for McDonnell Douglas, and then got some business management experience there. And his brother was a miner at Kennecott, the massive copper mine here in Utah. So after the war, they came back together to farm on their grandfather's property. And they were farming. In the 1950s, there was a drought that was just really rough, and it was pretty much wiped the farm out. But they knew there was salt that had poked up north and south of their farm. So they took a big piece of rebar and pounded it down through their field to see where the salt came closest to the surface, knowing that if it was north and south of them, it had to be underneath them. And right in the center of the farm, the salt came pretty close to the surface, about 30 feet from the surface. And so they bought a bulldozer and some mining equipment and plowed the barley and the alfalfa out of the way and went into the salt business, selling it initially for cows because as we talked earlier, cows need salt, and then selling it to the road departments because salt will melt ice on roads and keep the roads safe. And at the time, they would eat it for themselves because they thought it tasted pretty good, but it was also cheap and easy. And so they were, why buy it from somebody else? But it was seen as inferior because the salt had this rose quartz color. And if you remember back in the 1950s, good food was white flour, white sugar, very processed. And so this salt looked dirty. It looked not clean. And so they didn't eat it they ate it themselves and they thought it tasted pretty good. And in the deposit, there are different spots, as you remember, with different levels of minerals. And in the US, food salt is considered 97%. Food salt has to be 97% sodium and chloride with only 3% minerals. And there are spots in the mine, as you were down there, that have this higher level of mineral and some with less. And so we target those areas. But it wasn't until the 1970s, a nutritionist from California came through and got a tour of the mine because, tour the Grand Canyon, see the salt mine, and you go home. And we didn't think much of it. And we started getting these phone calls from California, but then also from across the US saying, hey, we want to buy your salt. And we said, great. Do you want it for your cows or for your roads, or what do you want it for? And they said, no. This nutritionist said, your salt is the healthiest and the tastiest salt in all of America. And so the family sat around and said, well, if we're going to sell it to these health food stores, we need to come up with a name. And it's not processed salt. It's not fake salt. It's not half salt. It's just real salt. And as silly as the name sounded, that's what they called it. And then all of a sudden,
Redmond's actually the town.
Redmond is the town.
Yeah, that's funny because I thought it was the Redmond people, right? I'm like, who are the Redmonds, right? So it's a Redmond salt named after the town.
There's 3 red mounds right behind the town. And so, and my grandfather didn't want the company named after, nothing wrong with that, didn't want the company named after him or the name. They wanted it to be more lasting. And so that's why they named the company, instead of, Bosshardt or, something like that, they named it Redmond after the town. And so that's kind of how the company started. And for years, it was just a small operation. The 2 brothers kind of living the American dream. And in the early 2000s, my family sold the business. And so it's still privately held, but it's just not my family that's involved anymore, although a lot of us are still around, like my cousin Kyle, who gave you the tour of the salt mine. But it's just a really fun company to be a part of. We are a salt company. We sell salt. We also have a kind of a construction side where we do fencing and decking and pergolas. But we like to say that we're really a people company because, and maybe that sounds, overly utopian, but as you came down, I hope you felt that yes, we do salt and we do construction. We have a natural dairy where we do raw milk and raw cheese and things like that. But we're really, wanting to make a difference in people's lives because we feel that most people are with their coworkers more than they are their family. And so we want to make a company a place where you actually can make a lasting contribution and not feel, stuck, or not feel like you're just counting the hours to get home to what's really important. And so we've tried to create a culture of elevating the human experience, where we try to do that with our vendors, with people like yourself that come and experience Redmond, because we feel like the company should be more about life than just salt.
Yeah, and there's zero doubt. I mean, I'm a judge of, like, is this legit or is it are people putting on it? You go to a tour and people really don't care, and they go, over here on the left is what you're gonna see, and that they don't really care about your guys. I'm telling you, from the guy who was making the steaks and grilling it, he goes, oh my gosh, he gets all excited. He goes, I use this spice, so I put this in there. And he just loves it. He goes, and I go, tell me about the mine, man. And he goes, oh my gosh, I've had someone, he starts telling me story after story about, just the guys getting together and the camaraderie and like how they just love it. It's a family. It really is. Like, these guys, and some of these are gruff looking, strong, you look at these guys and they're no nonsense, no BS about them, but they love the mine. And they're like, you'll say it saved my life. And I was in hard times and I got a job here and then I got my act together. And, so it's so cool to see that. And you can't fake the passion that people, I mean, they're so excited. They can't wait to get you down there to share it with you, because they love it. Because it's funny because I remember one of the doctors I used to work with in the ER, I'd be like, I don't know how you guys do it. It's crazy. And she would always say, well, just another day in the salt mine. She goes, at least I'm not working the salt mine today. And then when I went there to the salt mine, I was like, well, I'd rather work in the salt mine than the ER. Like these guys are having a blast and they just, you're down there. And the one thing too, I'll tell you, because a big thing I talk about is finding your peace. Like, where do you find peace? Where do you feel your nerves are calmed and going there? Because there's huge factors involved with the cortisol levels and stress hormones and all this stuff we're dealing with. But down in the mine, I'll tell you, and it was kind of similar to when the first time I went scuba diving. I thought it would be really stressful. Then I get down there and I'm so at peace, and you're like, oh, this is beautiful, and I'm calm, and I'm in good hands. This guy's watching me, and everything's good. And you feel this peace that's different than, because you're not thinking about paying bills and next week I got to take care of this. I got this, my accountant, I got to talk to, my attorney, whatever. You're just down there enjoying the moment. And in the salt mine, we were down there, and I'll tell you, it was a really remarkable experience. We go down there and they turn off the lights and you feel the temperature like perfect. And they're like, yeah, we have hammocks here. We can go here and take it. I mean, it's pitch black. You can't see your hand in front of you. I'm telling you, but people who haven't experienced it, it's crazy, like being in the Carlsbad Caverns or something. And I'm thinking, man, this would be a perfect place to take a nap. You turn up, there's zero, like you talk about blackout curtains, man, there's nothing like that. But we were down there and Kyle said, hey, does anyone here know how to sing? And this one girl's like a really good singer. And she sang Amazing Grace down there with all of us with the lights out in the pitch dark. And it just, it was like, oh my gosh, I could just stay here all day. And so I didn't want to go back. It's just amazing that you're just shut off from I mean, plus you're down there. At first you're like, oh, if I get stuck down here, I'm done for. But then you realize like, this is a really calming, cool place. Except my youngest daughter's like, I'm like, we have to go there. And she's like, no way. I'm not going in a cave. Like she had a claustrophobic experience one time in Europe. And she's like, no, I'm not doing that again. But
it's kind of
it is really amazing.
Kind of a natural deprivation tank because, you're not getting cell phone calls. It kind of just puts you at a place where, it's quiet and it's very serene. It's a pretty neat experience to be down in the mine, and you're in the bowels of the earth. You're in this deposit that hasn't seen light for 150 million years, and it's a pretty neat experience. I'm glad that you took the time while you were at the keto event to come down and say hi.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, really, that's why I got really excited. That was why I was excited to have you on, because I wanted to hear the history and how, like, your history growing up as a kid. What did you think of the mine? Was it just like a boring thing, or was it like you had to go down there? What was your experience growing up and bringing you to where you are now?
Well, it's kind of fun when my dad said, "Hey, if you don't straighten up, I'm going to send you to the salt mines." He wasn't kidding. No, but it just was, I didn't know, I was born in the mid late 70s. So the mine had been around for, quite a long time before then. And so I remember, growing up and going down into the mine with my dad. And of the two brothers, my grandfather had the business experience at McDonnell Douglas, and his brother had the mining experience. And so kind of growing up, my side of the family did more of the customer service and the sales and the marketing, and the other side of the family did more of the operations and the mining, just because, my dad spent time with his dad, who was more on the operation or the office side, and his cousin spent time with his dad, who was in the more of the mining. And so that's kind of how we just grew up. But I remember, growing up and taking friends, and we'd go down and do some barbecue right in the mouth of the portal, and it's hard to say, because it was just part of life. And then, I had quite a few siblings. I'm one of 8 kids, and so, growing up, I was the only one that just loved the salt. Every time that my dad would say, "Hey, can you come help?" I just loved being around the salt industry. And so as a kid, I was, filling shakers, and I'd get like 5 cents a label. I could sit there and put labels on at the house, and he'd give me 5 cents a label. And then when I got a little older, I could go down and actually fill shakers. And I remember early on, it took us like a whole month to make a pallet of shakers, because it was such a slow process. And but my dad had always told me, he said, "Look, Darryl, if you want to work at the company, that's great, but I won't hire you until you work for somebody for at least 2 years. So after college, you've got to go, work for somebody else. And then if you still want to come back and there's a spot for you, would love to have you, which I
That's
think was
awesome.
really,
That's awesome. Yeah, that's
I think it was
awesome.
really good advice. And so after college, I got a Bachelor's of Science, went and worked for the state of Utah in the governor's office for a while, helping with government contracting and writing business plans and getting SBA funding for small businesses. And then came back to the business about 3 years later, and have just enjoyed salt and ever since. So
That's amazing. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, because I was thinking about when I didn't really realize it until I went on your website, was looking around. I was like, oh my gosh. So it was cool. I mean, just stepping back, when we were in the salt mine, they give us a little bag and they go, okay, pick up all the salt pieces you want, take it home and give it to friends or whatever. So, I had some nice pieces I put on my barbecue, and I throw my steak on there and let it sit there for a couple of minutes each side, throw it on the barbecue, throw it back on this darn salt. And so that was cool. But then I realized when we had our salt drama at home, my wife was freaking out, and we were actually making steaks for friends. And I go, oh, I think we have, when we were there, we got some other Redmond, like now you have the smoked salts, like mesquite smoked and hickory. How does that come about, and what's the process on that?
yeah, so early on when we had the salt, we started looking at other products in the seasoning category, and we looked at, like a garlic salt or a seasoning salt. And if you look at the label on most of those, they're clear full of garbage. A lot of salts, seasoning salts, will have sugar added. A lot of them will have things like monosodium glutamate added as a flavor enhancer, because they're putting salt in that's bitter. Natural salt should be sweet. Processed salt has a very sharp, bitter flavor. So to overcome that, you can add sugar to your seasoning salts. And so we thought, what, we could do seasoning better. If we found a great source of organic garlic, we get a nice freeze-dried, non-processed, organic garlic. We add salt to it. It can be that simple. So we made garlic salt. Then we thought, what? People like some of these, fancier seasoning blends for their steaks. What if we just took, organic, pepper and garlic and paprika and coriander and celery and put them all together with just salt, no MSG, no sugars. And so we made a seasoning salt, and then an onion salt. And then, and that people just loved them. And it was this idea of keep the product as simple, as clean, and as real as possible. A lot of products that are smoked are actually made with smoked flavor or liquid smoke. Fortunately, salt, as I mentioned, is hygroscopic, so it absorbs moisture very well. So you actually can put this in a smoker, especially if it's humid, and you can, just like you'd smoke a steak, you can actually smoke salt, and the salt will adhere to that wet, humid smoke. And so we do make a smoked salt. We have 3 different, like a cherry and a hickory and a blend, and it's just smoked salt. And so if you don't have a smoker, or you really like that smoke flavoring, you can just add a little bit of that smoked salt to your steak or to your vegetables, whatever you're eating, and it really adds a powerful smoked flavor with just good clean salt.
Yeah, without having to smoke the meat for 12 hours. You go, okay, you just make steak and go, oh, this tastes really good, especially if you make it on a Traeger or one of those kind of the pellet barbecues where you get some smoke flavor and you add that in. Or if you're smoking stuff anyways, you might as well add that on to the outside to get a little bit more, right?
And salmon's real easy. You can take a piece of salmon and put that smoked salt on there and just cure it with smoked salt. It'll suck that moisture out and kind of make a ceviche or a cured a salmon fillet with just smoked salt.
So you just do that raw, you're saying? Like a ceviche?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right, man. We have to talk. I have to figure these recipes out.
Yeah, put a fillet down and then just cover it in salt, and it will cure the salmon.
So you put a good coating of salt on there, like a really thick coat, and let it do it.
And let it sit there. Yep.
And then you just chop it up, and you have like a ceviche.
Yeah, and you can let it sit there for, depends on the thickness of the meat. It'll take, how long it'll take to suck that moisture out. But I think on our video, Chef Sean does a video on curing salmon with just salt. All
right, here's the deal, man. At some point, we have a party down there in the mine, and we try out all your recipes to make sure they're legit. Just double check on you on this stuff. Yeah, but I know the steak for sure is legit with the seasonings he did. He had some special potion that he was putting on there. I'm like, man, you're out there. It's going to taste better anyways because you're outside, and it was a beautiful day. It's like, man, but it was it was something. And then that was my first time ever. I didn't even know you had the relight, right? So this watermelon lime has got me through a lot of big bike rides too, like just sipping, as a matter of fact, sipping through the day when I'm fasting, it's a huge deal. It really makes a difference for me.
Well, years ago, I used to give, lessons or classes like at the school and just tell people, hey, if you want to make your own sports drink, take a quart of good, clean water, add a quarter teaspoon of real salt, a squeeze of lemon, and it makes a sports drink. You don't have to buy the, hot pink, purple stuff with all the sugar in it for pennies on the dollar. And I still suggest that. It's a great way to do that. The nice thing about the Relight is it does have the real salt as the base, but then we also do add some added potassium and magnesium. As you pointed out, many people are magnesium deficient. I think if we went back and looked at our human ancestors, they ate foods that were much higher in potassium and magnesium than we do today. And so that's one of the reasons that we add, a little extra potassium and magnesium, because most people, we do need salt, sodium chloride, yes, but we also need to have those other ones. So we add that in for, whether you're doing hot yoga, maybe you're a firefighter, you're sweating in your gear, or I'm an avid mountain biker, and you'll start cramping if you just have water, especially if it's distilled water.
Yeah, it's really critical. People don't realize that just drinking regular water. I mean, it a lot of times, like you're saying, you're gonna add that in and dilute it out, So like a lot of times when I do a hard workout, I'll have my salt, my whatever I'm having, Relight or sometimes Element, whichever one I'm using, and then I'll have regular water afterwards, and depending, because I've had times where I've done, like as a matter of fact, one time everyone was having margaritas in the afternoon. I'm like, I'm not going to drink a margarita, but I go, oh, you know what? Maybe I could just make some of this electrolyte drink and kind of make something that I could just. But what happens is like my rings were tight and all that stuff that day, and so I had overdone it with the salt a little bit, so I just added in some water and everything was good. But so a lot of people. What I would say is, look, if you're really poorly controlled diabetic and your sugars are high and you're shooting insulin, you have to watch your salt intake at that point. But the whole point is, okay, how do we get you healthier? And some of the best things you could do is time restricted eating, intermittent fasting to lower that insulin level down. And you'll realize at some point, like now, I could have a couple of those a day and it doesn't do anything. I don't swell like that back when I was more insulin resistant. But I think it's just the point of saying, okay, what works for me? Do I do half a packet, to start with, and then add up, and depending on how and I think and I'll tell you the other crazy thing is, like when I do spin classes and I do, work out in the morning, and I always think, oh, okay, now I can, when I'm done, I don't even drink it during my workout, but after I was like, oh, I'm going to sip that and enjoy it because I've earned that, and you're replenishing your body in a way where, you get that little sweet thing that you like to have sometimes. And really it just takes away that sweet tooth, and again, people just don't realize if they just eat extra salt, then that sweet tooth, that craving they're going crazy for goes away. And it's the body, your body's telling you need something. Obviously a lot of times those cravings are because you just enjoy those things. You get that little dopamine rush from it. But a lot of times your body's telling you, yeah, you need to get some more extra salt in. So, you can either do it by eating salt or you could eat sugar to raise your insulin to hold on to more salt. So I think it's just kind of a cool thing. And just like what you're saying, and throughout time, I've heard people say, yeah, I just put a little salt on the back of my hand, lick it, and then my cravings go away. Or I have that hunger signal goes away pretty quickly. So yeah, it's pretty cool, man. I'm really excited to hear your story, and it's so great, really. Just like Charlie, all the people I've come across at the that work for your company are salt of the earth, really people. And I was as a matter of fact, when I was leaving the salt mine, I was like, these are the salt of the earth people here. They're cool. They love what they do, and it sounds like you've been so successful that you've been too dang busy, right, to keep up with. As a matter of fact, it was funny because I was like, because when I placed my order, it said, it may be delayed because we're really popular right now, but I got it really quickly. I was like, oh, yes, thank you. I got my salt, because my wife was on my back about it. She's like, you got to order this stuff, hurry, So
Well,
I was
Dr.
happy when it
Lenskis,
came. I mean, we could go down. I mean, we can get it at wherever, but it's nice to order it directly from you.
Dr. Lenskis, I think one of the neat things that you're doing in your practice is helping people understand that difference in the relationship between salt and sugar, because I do think it's so many people struggle with that, and they've heard salt's bad, and in the right applications and the right situation, there can be some problems with salt for sure. However, by focusing on the sugar side, then it helps regulate that salt side, and it's not. I just think it's great to hear medical professionals starting to really tell the story that you're telling.
Well, we see it, and I go, okay, look, if you're going to try to fast, you're going to need salt. right? But the thing is, when you're fasting, what are you doing? You're lowering your insulin level down. Where I'm talking about like time restricted, like if you're not eating lunch. So if you say, okay, for lunch, I'm having my relight, right? Or whatever, uh, you're lowering your insulin that entire time, especially if you're exercising, you're lowering your insulin. And if you're exercising, then you need some extra salt anyways. So you're sweating that out. So those are the things. But if you're sedentary, couch potato, diabetic, and you're not doing anything, it's like, okay, don't just add salt to your diet. I mean, allow that to, it has to be in the right lifestyle and the right combination. Because if your blood pressure is super high and your insulin is 58, I'm not going to tell you the extra salt, because you have to fix that insulin problem. But the salt allows you to fix the insulin problem, if you know what I'm saying. So it's amazing, because exercise, fasting, watching your stress, all those things lower the insulin level. We know that. That's very clear. So if we all went down to the salt mine and relaxed for it, like if I could get seriously, if I get my patients who are the most stressed, like they're the ones who don't lose weight for sure. No question about it. Sleep deprived, stressed out people who are drinking, good luck. It's going to be a rough road. So if I could have them go 10 minutes down in the salt mine, don't even eat this. So just go down the salt mine for 10 minutes a day. They can just reflect and relax and do that. I'm telling you, they get better. And I see people, if I get, just do yoga, meditate. You don't have to go in the salt mine, but mentally go in the salt mine where you're away from everything and you're just isolated from stuff, go in that little hammock there, or just think about it. If I think about that, I relax already, So it's those kind of things of finding I think the big thing is finding your peace. And I think also having a company that's as successful as yours is, but it's still a family. The problem is when you grow, it's hard to maintain that family, because the family gets so big. It's like if you had a small family, you only had 8 kids. I think Ben has like 14 or some crazy amount. Like, man, that is super.
Sounds stressful right there.
Yeah, right.
I
You
got
have so
3, and
many
that's plenty.
families. Like, man, I know you have 3. You're a slacker, right? I quit it too, because I'm like, I'll have to buy a bigger car. Honey, are you good? Yeah, I'm good with 2. All right, we're good. So, but as the family grows, it's harder. But I think you instill like your positivity. It's funny because I didn't know you, and I'm like, I wonder what Darryl's gonna be like. He's gonna be like some redneck guy that's kind of like, the guy, gruff guys in the mine. But man, I mean, these guys are a lot of fun, laughing, having stories of working down there, just crazy stuff.
Well, I think I'm just delighted to see medical doctors that are taking a much more consulting type role and using medicine and using all of the beautiful parts of Western medicine to help people, but also helping them realize that lifestyle, you can't overcome with pills and drugs what we're doing to our bodies through lifestyle. And I think a medical professional like yourself that can say, yes, there's certainly drugs and things that we can do to really help, and for a lot of people we can fix some imbalances, and we can do this, but we can't do it in isolation. There still has to be some personal responsibility where you can say, hey, you know what, yes, I can help, but if you went for a walk every day, that's going to really help as well. So let's work together on this, and instead of just looking for a magic switch or a cure. And I think more and more medical professionals and doctors are starting to see that they're participating and helping and coaching, and not just curing, but coaching. And I think I just love that part that I'm seeing in so many medical professionals today, where they're just really participating and being a coach and a mentor in the journey of health, and not just a place to come and get a quick fix.
Yeah, and I think that's like, if you think about it, like a lot of the meds we use, like Lasix and hydrochlorothiazide, what do? They make you pee out extra salt, and that's how we lower your blood pressure. It's like, why are you holding out extra salt? Because you have high insulin. Okay, why don't we fix that problem? Go on a bike ride with Darryl, right? Go out and do stuff you enjoy. Have a good work environment. That all those things play a role. So, gosh, I don't want to take too much of your time. I knew this hour would go by too dang quick, because it was great information. I really appreciate it. So I have to ask you, first of all, I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite, like, of all the Redmond stuff, what's your favorite product that you go, I love this one. This is my baby. I love it.
I would say probably our toothpaste, and our clay products.
Really? Haven't
salt.
tried either of those yet. Oh my God. Now I got to try it. Tell Charlie to send me out a sample pack so I could try all these things.
Okay. Yeah, I will. I think salt's great. But I think that clay is a really fun product too. Animals eat clay, humans have used clay. It's a great base for a toothpaste. It's good for facials. So yeah, I like the salt. I use it every day, but I think the clay is some pretty cool stuff too.
So toothpaste and clay, you actually eat the clay?
Yeah, we don't sell it for that, but like activated charcoal, it works pretty
Yeah,
similar.
yeah, totally. I mean, I have people that are doing that. Oh, I didn't know you guys are doing. Oh, that's good information. Okay, all right. I know it's funny because maybe I have to try it because I don't know if you heard of neem toothpaste. It's supposed to be
Yeah.
like, so I've heard people talking about all that stuff. So I try it. My wife's like, look, you're not gonna be kissing me if you're using that toothpaste. I just don't like because she hates cloves. It's the clove thing that she doesn't like the smell of
Uh,
cloves. I'm like, I like it actually, but it's funny. So I gotta try it. Maybe I'll help my marriage.
well, we don't have a neem flavor, but we do have a peppermint that she might like. So
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, man. That's a deal. All right. I'm gonna have to place an order for that. And then for you, what's life's best medicine? Like
for
where do you go
me,
when everything's rough and you like, you're trying to run a huge corporation and everyone's on you and you're trying to get the mind, all that stuff. Where do you go? What gives you peace? Where's your place?
my place is on my bike. I live in the mountains of Utah, and I can have a lot of things going wrong. I can be frustrated with work or the kids or whatever, and I can jump on the bike and head up into the mountains and see trees and smell the beautiful air, and I come back and life's better. And so I try to get out on the bike pretty often, and I think it makes me a better, better husband, better father, probably a better human by getting out and spending a little time by myself on the bike. I like to say push pedals, not pills. And for me, that helps. I'm not against medicine at all, but I can accomplish a lot mentally and emotionally on that bike for a few hours a day.
Yeah, I'll tell you that's great advice. I mean, for me, I get out my road bike with my buddies. We've done mountain biking too, and you get out there and you just have a good time. And it's just blowing off steam, and you could deal with stuff like after I have or a good workout, and then no one's gonna upset you that day. You go, okay, whatever, I'm good. Like you have that lower stress hormones, cortisol. That's great advice. For people listening. Really, I just did a slide for one of my talks that says, "Oh, exercise is basically useless except if you care about," and it has like 50 things on there that it does for you. Like if you care about those things, like not having dementia, not having Parkinson's, not all the diabetes, polycystic ovaries, erectile dysfunction, all those things improve with exercise. So you look at it and go, okay, if I had a pill, if your Redmond salt had that, I could just sprinkle that in everyone, I'd be a multimillionaire and retire. But the problem is you have to go out and do those things, like go out on their bike, go find your peace, and if that's your peace, you do that. So many people, instead of going on a mountain bike, they're eating cookies and donuts and cake at night to calm their nerves when they're upset or they're stressed. So that's a huge point. I'm glad you brought that up. But the exercise, and then as you exercise, so do you take your little relight with you in your little water bottle and sip that when you're going?
I do. I have two water bottles, and
Oh,
one is with Relight, and one's just good clean spring water.
yeah, that's what I do too. All right, cool, man. That's all good stuff. And how do people track you down if they want to? And I'll put my affiliate link at the bottom here with Redmond. But how do people track you down if they want to talk to you on social media or follow Redmond? How do they
Yeah,
engage?
so our website's redmond.life. Instead of redmond.com, it's redmond.life, Life. Of course, Real Salt is an easy name to remember. If you go to Real Salt as opposed to fake salt, just realsalt.com, you can backlink to Redmond Life and see all of our products. And yeah, I would love to hear from you. We don't do open tours of the salt mine. Otherwise, I'd invite everybody out. We've got some mining regulations that don't allow us to do that, but we would love to have you stop by and see us if you're ever in Utah skiing or hitting the national parks. We'd love to have you come by and say hi. And Dr. Lenskis, really appreciate you taking the time today. I've sure enjoyed this, and I'll get Charlie to send some toothpaste out to you. And
All
look
right,
forward to meeting
that's
you.
a deal. Yeah, I look forward to it. And, hopefully when I'm in town, I get to see the nice people at Keto Chow and hang out with them. So I'll be in Utah, hopefully more frequently than I have been. But I loved it. I had such a blast. Ben Bickman's right down the street from you, and there's so many great people in that area. So, I love it when I'm there. That's a peaceful spot for me. I've had a lot of good fun in the snow and hiking, and yeah, it's just a beautiful place. I haven't made it out to Moab yet, but one of these days, my in my brain, I want to like walk through Moab with Bickman and talk about life and what matters and all that kind of good stuff. So one of these days that'll happen. But thanks for the great work you're doing. Thanks for the great product, and really I feel great for my listeners and my patients and friends and family to use your products. And so it's good to have something that you're doing a good job of providing stuff that we need. And so everyone, Thanks for listening. There's a lot of good wisdom in this, but I think it's a lot of good education because, in our mind, for me, I look at patients and go, okay, we're going to go up on your healthy fat. You're going to have more avocados and olives and things like that and coconut oil. And we're going to go up on your fat and we're going to go up on your salt intake. And they look at me like I'm absolutely lost my mind. But trust me, there's science to this and there's a reason we do it that way. If you try to white knuckle it through fasting without salt, it's going to be rough. It's probably going to be really dangerous. So, there's products available to you that make the journey fun. So it's not like you're doing penance and suffering. You could actually enjoy it. So there's, I know Keto Chow has some drops. There's a lot of things out there. So just look to see what's available to help supplement you through that. And really our goal is really to lower that insulin, lower the stress hormones. And that's why I'm doing this podcast, hopefully to help you to say, okay, it's not just what I eat. I don't just eat these things and I'm good. You have to look at the stress and the sleep, get out on your road bike or mountain bike, go for a walk, pet your dog, go for a swim. All those things lower the stress hormones and they raise up the feel good oxytocin hormone that is mind blowing of the benefits. You don't have to shoot. And that's the thing is I look at all these studies on oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And when you're in love and you're less stressed and you're enjoying life and you're passionate about what you do, all those things get better. But the problem is every study says, well, we're trying to figure out a good delivery system for that. How to like manufacture it. And it's like, well, why don't you just live a better life and not be stressed and hate the world? That makes a difference. So Darryl, thanks so much. And thanks for all you're doing. Have a great weekend. And I'm really excited to get this out to the people.
Thanks, Dr. Lenskis. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. Have a great day. And thank you for listening. And thank you for your support.